special site. And we're back. We're live. It's COMP397, summer 2016 semester. It's week 8, part 1 of our broadcast in this crazy, crazy class that we're going to be doing together. It's web game programming here at Centennial College. And what we're going to be doing today is start off almost from scratch about what TypeScript's about, how we're going to get things together, and what we're going to be producing over the course of the next 7 weeks. All right, so again, I invite you to look at TypeScript just for 1 second, typescriptlang.org. TypeScript being a superset of JavaScript, what it does is it brings us closer to the ECMAScript 6 standard. ECMAScript 6 uses classes and objects a little differently than ECMAScript 5. And if you don't know what ECMAScript is, I'm sure you can refer you to, I'll go to ECMAScript. If you go to the foundation for ECMAScript, so if I go look, just look at ECMAScript itself, right? And if I just look that up, ECMAScript.org. This is their boring site, but what they do is it's kind of a standard work that we use to describe how we form up modules and structures in the JavaScript programming language. Okay, so it's evolved as of July 2015, last year around this time actually. We moved from ECMAScript 5 standard to ECMAScript 6, which now is called ECMAScript 2015, right? However, the browser support for this isn't very wide. It's not very good. It's only about 60% globally right now. So as we move higher and higher, we may not need compiled languages like TypeScript, right? What TypeScript allows us to do is write something. Here, if you go to Playgrounds with me, join me on the playground, please. This is a we do together course, not a you watch course. Let's do it. So if I go to Playgrounds here, as an example, you can see that I've got a greeter class on this side. And I'm going to make it something different. Let's put together a person class. So here's my class. This is how we do TypeScript. Class, we use the class keyword. Take a look at the right. On the right, this is pure emitted JavaScript. Hear my words. Emitted. I'm emitting JavaScript in the ECMAScript 5 standard. Here's TypeScript. So person, right? If I type in person as my class, this is something, if you've taken any object-oriented programming before, right? You can see that the person class itself, oops, the person class itself create the closure on this side, right? So JavaScript, what you see on the right side is a function, right? This actually is an alias that points at an anonymous self-executing function that has another function that's inside of it. Okay, that's what happens. Okay, so anonymous self-executing function, also called an immediately invoked function expression, right? An IFI. Right? That IFI immediately invokes, in other words, it self-invokes. It calls itself, right? And if you notice, the syntax is funky, right? You look at it and you're like, wow, darn, that's ugly, Tom, right? It is. That's why people look at JavaScript and they go, spaghetti code. I'm a developer and I hate JavaScript, right? People say that kind of stuff. JavaScript is very flexible and it's made for a reason the way it is, right? Let's continue. So I've got my class person and I need a constructor because usually we have a constructor. And what we do with the constructor is we call it constructor. It's not like other languages like C# and Java where it takes the same name as the class itself. That's normally how we make a constructor. Here we can just call it constructor. And let's say in the constructor, I want to take in 2 parameters. I want to take the name and I also want to take age. Now I can leave it like this, certainly, right? But the power of TypeScript is that we can create a type for these things. Right now, if you notice, if you hover over these things, the type is any, which is one of the types of JavaScript. It means that we don't know what type it is. JavaScript is trying to, kind of figure out what the type is for name and age, and it can't. So the type is any. That is an actual type. Let's move this past this, and let's assign a type. Well, we know that name would be a string, right? So that's how you type. You say the variable name, and then colon, and then after that would be the type, string. There's string, there's Boolean, there's number, not float or int, number, right? And others we're going to talk about. So age obviously is a number, right? We're going to put that in there as well. And typically what you want to see is something like this. For example, I might have some comments at the top here. These are private instance variables, right? In other structures, here we go. In my private instance variables, I might have a private keyword. You can use the private keyword just like this. This is TypeScript, my friends. So here's private, and I want to do something like this. Private underscore, I usually use an underscore. Name, right, for private variables is of type string, right? And then private underscore age is of type number, right? And now we have our constructor area here, if you notice. So here's our constructors. Might have more than one. For now, we only have one. I'm just separating this out. Notice that on the right, what it's emitting. So far, nothing different, right? But this is kind of weird, right? We kind of do this thing, and what we normally would do in a constructor is do something like this. This dot underscore name is equal to name, and this dot underscore age is equal to age, which is something like we're taking the local variable that we pass into the constructor and assign it to the private instance variables that are up here. Notice the construct that happens on the right-hand side, right? So this is your pure emitted JavaScript on the right side. This is ECMAScript 5, right? So what it does, again, is it creates a closure. Here's your closure, right? It's self-executing, and we're assigning a variable person that is an alias for this closure. That's what it is. Inside the function, we have another function. And this function itself is the constructor function right here. This is what the constructor would look like in pure JavaScript. So this is a great way. If you ever look at TypeScript and you want to learn JavaScript, if you don't know JavaScript, it's a great way of learning JavaScript because you can look at it and go, okay, so that's what that constructor would look like in JavaScript. All right, so we have constructors. We also have methods. So let's put some methods in here, right? So we'll call these public methods. By the way, there's other formations we have to talk about as well. But here's some public methods in here. And let's say, for example, well, I want this, the typical thing is to make a public, use the public keyword. Do you have to? No, because it's public by default. But we like to do it to be explicit, right? So public, and then the method would be something like speaks, person speaks, right? And then what we want to say is something like this. Well, let's do a console command. So we'll say console.log, right? And something like this._name, right? So the actual instance variable plus, you know, a string, which would convert the name into a string if it wasn't already a string, plus the name is equal to something like speaks, or says hello. I would say we say says hello. Hello world. All right. So this name, whoever it is, says hello, right? So public speaks. This name says hello. Now here's something with the method. Because it's a method, we also can determine what type it returns, right? For example, our method right now returns void, nothing. That is a type. So we can put that in there as well. So methods can have a type, functions can have a type, as well as parameters or variables. They can have a type as well. Why would we do this, right? It adds additional overhead. Take a look at what it does on the right-hand side, though. Does it actually do anything? Nope. JavaScript-wise, one thing we did was we created a prototype. So we used person.prototype, right? Prototype means, hey, take the person itself, the person class, and add on speaks as a method to the person class. So we're extending the person class by adding on speaks. Okay, that's what we're doing here, right? So this is the JavaScript. This is the TypeScript. I don't know about you, but I love TypeScript because it's nice and easy looking. It reminds me of C. If you're a C# developer, TypeScript is for you, baby, right? You're gonna love TypeScript, right? If you're a Java developer, TypeScript is for you. You look at it and it makes sense, right? It's got a little bit more structure to it than regular JavaScript, right? JavaScript makes sense to me. I've been doing JavaScript for a long, long time. But the problem is that when you look at it, it seems to be less descriptive of what it's really doing. You have to really understand JavaScript at its roots. And a lot of us, when we're making games, we don't have time for that. Yeah, we're in a rapid application development world, right? And TypeScript is one of those tools that can help us. All right, so we got this speaks. How do we use the person class like any other thing? So if I was to declare a variable, by the way, from now on, let's not use var. Let's use let, right? If I go let, why let? Who knows why I will use let rather than var? Anybody? Who's a ECMAScript 6 person? Yeah, why?
Let lets you declare a variable in local scope.
It does. And what's the difference between var and let? Like, why would I use let over var? Right? Because people are going to say, I don't know the difference between var and let. Anybody? Well, there's something called hoisting that happens in JavaScript, right? So when I describe a variable and I put var like this, so if I go var and person, right, which is a type person, take a look, I'm doing this, right, is equal to a new person, and I'm going to pass in two parameters, right? I'm going to pass in my name, Tom. You can pass in your name, and my age. Oh God, right? And then if I go person.speaks, right, which I can do, it's going to do something. That's the way we would do it normally. And then we can do it here in JavaScript or TypeScript. Take a look what happens on the right side. Nothing's different here on this part, right? This is identical to this part over here, right? There's no difference. The advantage is this piece, right? This piece is, you know, for most people, syntactically, it's hard to remember, right? You might get it wrong. It fails silently. These are bad things about JavaScript, right? Even if you have a really good editor or IDE like Visual Studio 2015, it doesn't matter, right? Still, you know, you have to debug if there's something wrong, if you type this wrong. It doesn't give you any code hinting if it's the right type or whatever. Here, we get automatic code hinting. I can hover over something and know that a particular object is considered a string, right? And so on. So that's one thing. This is kind of a very, very simple example, but the idea here is what we're going to be using over and over again. I'm sorry that people can't see it, but it's being recorded, worst case scenario. So let var, if I declare it down here, what JavaScript does, regular JavaScript, it goes through the file, because it parses through the file, right? And then it hits the var, and it goes, oh, I got a var. What am I going to do? I'm not going to leave it here. I'm going to put it up here. It hoists the variable declaration to the top. So even if I declare a variable down here, I can still call it from up here. Same thing with functions. If I call a function down here, make a function, and I call it from up here before it's declared, it'll hoist that function to the top. That's bad, and it's good. It's good because we can use the function before it's declared, but it's bad because I can use a function before it's declared. Especially when you get into variables, I didn't declare it, but I'm assigning it, and you lose control, right? Let stops that. It says wherever I declare that variable, that's where it's being declared. Please don't hoist it to the top, okay? So some of the challenges are when you use JavaScript, you would remember, you think, well, JavaScript's like Java, right? And if I declare it inside of a function, then it stays inside the function. No, that was an issue, right? So in ECMAScript 6, we're fixing that. So we want to turn our vars as many times as we can into lets, right? Notice that there's no change over here. Emitted JavaScript-wise, it turns the same, but let gives us a different way of doing things from this perspective. The compiler acts differently here. When we compile or transpile, it's like transport, Star Trek, transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, right? When we transpile, it basically parses through the code that I've made and converts it to pure JavaScript the way we have it over here. Very, very simple example, but how do I check this, right? Because I want to check this out. I can run this right here, right? If I click run, and you don't see anything. Well, of course you don't, because if I go to the inspector, though, and if I look at the console, you can see that Tom says hello, right? So if ever you have a problem transpiling, something doesn't work properly in Visual Studio Code, and you think it's supposed to work, or whatever, or you're using Visual Studio and you want to do a bit of an experiment to see if it's going to work, you know, JavaScript or TypeScript Playgrounds is a great place to check it out, right? It's live. You don't even need an editor. You can try and run some stuff and check things out. One of the things that we're going to be checking out a lot in this course over the next 7 weeks is the idea of modules, because we have to modularize our application, because we're going to have large pieces of code. And imagine looking through like classes and classes and classes. The best practice we normally use in other languages is we have one class, one file. All right, that's the kind of idea, right? We want to kind of do the same thing, and for that we can use something called modules or namespaces. They're kind of interchangeable, but the way we would do this, we would say module. Right? And let's say, for example, my person module was in the objects module. All right? So these are all my custom objects, whatever. I kind of put them in like this. And I want to take all this stuff, my class, and I want to cut it, and I want to put it inside here. Okay? Now take a look at what we have. We have a closure within a closure within a closure. Right? This is what's happening on the JavaScript side. Why? Right? Well, we can't do this anymore in a module because I've kind of enclosed my person class inside the objects module. How do I access it? It's got to be objects.person, just like any namespace. So if I go over here, this would be objects.person, right? So objects.person is the class, or the way I'm going to be using this thing, right? And it says objects has no. Here's another problem. Objects has. I know that it's in objects, but it's giving me a problem. We'll just leave it here for a second. It's good that it's giving me errors because there's a reason for it. So objects.person, if you notice, it's not emitting properly. It's giving me an error. This is good for TypeScript. Why? Because I'm not exposing my class right outside of the module. In order for me to use my class or consume my class, I have to use the exports keyword, or export. So I go export class, right? Now take a look at the difference. Take a look over here what it's emitting, right? So if I take the export away, right? Notice that down here is where all the magic happens, right? And I'm getting an error down here, right? Down at the bottom. But if once I start typing export, look what's happening down here. Now it says objects.person is equal to person, and I'm able to access the person object outside of the object's container. I don't want to care about this. I just want to know about this, right? Much easier. Why? So I got my modules, objects, and I go objects.person as the type, right? And objects.person, I'm instantiating an object of type objects.person here. But you know, this can be quite irritating. Objects, especially if I do a lot of that, right? So sometimes what you can also do is you can use the import keyword to import the person. And you can't do it here because this is in the same file, but I would do something like import, you know, person as an example. And what we want to do is we can use the as keyword, objects.person. Sometimes that works, by the way. It won't work in this module, like I said, because of where we are, right? We can also do person as objects.person here, right? That would work. Now, this is kind of weird. Notice how it says it's expecting a keyword like this, objects.person, right? So import person, objects.person. Now this works, but now because I did this, I'm creating an alias for objects.person in my module where I can just do this again, right? Why would I do this? I don't want to do objects.objects.objects, but I still want to enclose my person class inside of the objects module. That's why, right? Yes.
Can you do the import if you don't do the export?
No.
Okay.
You can't see anything. If you don't do an export within a module, you're blind. You don't see that object at all.
Okay.
That's good though, because what you can do is inside that module, you can put something that only this class can use. For example, if I want to use a function that's only available to this class, but nothing outside of this module, I can do that, right? Like a regular JavaScript function, no problem. So the great thing about TypeScript is it can be a hybrid for you. You don't have to go all TypeScript. You can do half TypeScript and half JavaScript. You can put as much or as little control elements in place as you want to help you write your code more efficiently, more effectively, you know, and give you code hinting, the tooling that you need in order for you to be more effective when you write enterprise level code, okay? So that's what we've done. So we've kind of enclosed our person class within an objects class, objects module. By the way, if I use, instead of module, if I use the word namespace, and the latest incarnation of JavaScript or TypeScript, it's okay. This is okay too. It's not going to do anything different here. So module, namespace is actually the new name we're supposed to use. It makes more sense, right? Because it's a namespace, right? That we're creating, almost like another container that we can compartmentalize and encapsulate our classes to hide them and the details about our classes from the outside world. This is the stuff we're going to be doing today, guys and girls. We need to create, like I said in my notification to you, if I go up to here into content, and if I go to, let's go over here, there we go. If I go to here, notice that week 8 says Monday, July 4th, no exam. We'll cover TypeScript in more depth. We'll introduce finite state machine design pattern. By the way, I think only one person that I saw did it, but then again, we never explained it. No, he never really, I think he went into the details. I can't be sure, but the last professor may have not. Visual Studio Code, Bower, GitHub, typings, all that stuff we need to get going. And hopefully if we have time, I said, I'm going to start off with this mail pilot example. And like I said, in recent years, mail pilot's kind of become my hello world. Once I know how to do mail pilot this game in 1, I can do it in game programming 1 for people who've done game programming with me. I've done it in Swift for Apple Swift. I've done it with Android. I've done it across different platforms. And why? Because once you know a piece of code, you know the ins and outs of it, now you can learn another API, another platform, because you know the code. It's the exact same code, really. At the end of the day, most platforms are C influenced some way, right? So once you know how to do one thing, you can repeat that, and it's a pattern that you can repeat and learn from. So that's what I'm going to do with you today. I'm going to call this, we're going to create this mail pilot stuff. We'll see what time allows us. We're kind of almost into 50 minutes of my jabber, right? And we haven't done much except for, hey, this is how you do a class and a module. So that's what we're doing today. But also, if you haven't had a chance to do this, please get this part done. If you have your own laptop, this is definitely what you need to get done. Visual Studio Code, GitHub, your desktop tool. Sign up for GitHub. Again, for GitHub, for people who have to sign up, you go to github.com. It's a free account. I'm going to be pushing everything on the Centennial College. So if you go to GitHub, Centennial College, all my code is going to be there. It's already there for the most part. So if you actually follow the videos, it's there. And that's where I'm going to be pushing a lot of my changes, right? So we're going to be doing that today. And also, you can also sign up for Microsoft Azure, right? For people who haven't done that, you can go to dreamspark.com/student/software catalog, right? And everybody who's a Centennial College or any other college across Ontario has access to a couple things. One of them is Microsoft Azure for DreamSpark, right? So please, if you haven't had a chance to do this, sign up for Microsoft Azure. You need to have a valid student ID, and there's several ways you can sign up. One thing you need for sure is a Microsoft account, right? If you don't feel like doing this piece, that's up to you. But everywhere inside your assignments, especially this new one that I put together and it's up online today, it's going to say deploy live, right? It's your choice where you want to deploy. If you want to deploy to the school server, I'm okay with that, but it's got to work, right? So, that's an option for you if you want to deploy to the students.cencol.ca, I think is what it is, right? If you want to do that, you can certainly do that and send me the link. But I'm going to always look for your GitHub, and I'm always going to look for your Azure link or some kind of live link and everything we do together going forward. Okay, so please have those two things ready. Sign up for Azure. It's free. There's some really cool resources you can get from it. We're going to talk about that later. In fact, I'm going to do my demo when we build out my this whole new project we're going to do today. It's all going to be up on Azure, right? So we're going to talk about how to do that. So that's that piece. Visual Studio Code. What is that? If I go VS Code, right? It's a project by Microsoft. And one of the things that Microsoft has been doing over about a year now, and a bit, maybe 2 years, is really trying to make their code cross-platform, which is pretty awesome to me, right? They've already done things with MVC Core. If you guys are following Microsoft, MVC Core is actually cross-platform already. If you want to write whole MVC applications, ASP.NET MVC, with your Mac, you can totally do it using Xamarin Studio or even VS Code. There's whole patterns of stuff that you can do outside using Visual Studio itself, Visual Studio 2015. Nothing's wrong with Visual Studio, though, and I don't want to take away from the beast that is Visual Studio. Visual Studio is like, I think it's 80 million lines of code now. It's crazy, right? It's huge, and it has so many little parts to learn. A lot of us don't use 1/10 of it, right, in terms of what we can do. And so Microsoft recognized that and said, look, we need some slimmed down version of an editor that's competitive with the stuff that's out there right now that gives good IntelliSense, especially for JavaScript. This editor was made with TypeScript, right? As an example, it's made with the Electron engine on the back end, right? Which is GitHub's Electron engine. Take a look at that if you're interested. And the great thing about it is it gives us all the code hinting we need to do good, solid JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay, so that's one thing. That's why I'm using it. It's also lightweight, and it's way more lightweight than Visual Studio. It has integrated GitHub, right? So and debugging tools, as well as task runners and all kinds of other stuff. And I can honestly say over the last year or so, it's become my favorite editor, right? Not that Atom isn't any good. Atom is pretty darn good too, right? And so is Brackets if you're a Brackets person, or even Sublime. Nothing's wrong with those really cool editors, right? And you can totally use them going forward. They have support for TypeScript. They have support for everything we're doing today. But I'm going to be focused on Visual Studio Code because for me, it's become like the de facto standard for how I do my stuff with Node and the mean stack, right? So that's why I use it. Again, please don't take away from, can you use Visual Studio? Absolutely. If I want to use WebStorm, an IntelliJ product, absolutely. It's a great product, right? Am I going to talk about WebStorm in this course? No, I'm not. I only have 7 weeks, right? So that's why I'm not going to do it. Not because I don't like the product. It's awesome. And not because I'm a Microsoft person. I'm not. As you can see, I'm using a Mac, right? So it's not that. It's because I want to choose, and I want you to do the same thing when you start learning your stuff, is choose the best platform for you. Don't worry. Be platform agnostic. Don't worry about being a Mac or Windows person. Don't go Mac, ooh, and Windows, hey, don't do that, right? Say, okay, this is the platform for me. I'm going to make awesome games no matter where I'm at, right? Maybe you're going to make awesome games on a Chromebook tomorrow. You don't know, right? Because we're moving away from hardware. We're going to transcend the hardware, like I keep saying, move away from it, and it's not going to be as important as the software and the coding, right? So this is something we use. One other thing that I recommend, if you don't want to use Visual Studio Code, and let's say you can't set it up today, but you still want to follow along, right? There's a great service out there called Cloud9. right? And I think it's worth taking a look at. If I go Cloud9, Cloud9 is a software as a service or platform as a service where you can sign up and have a full-fledged IDE live on the cloud, right? So you don't have to do all the setup. It's got a built-in command line. It's got a little Ubuntu editor in the bottom if you really want to go there. It has support for TypeScript. It has support for Heroku out of the box. It does a lot of stuff from the get-go. And if you sign in, an example for me, if I sign in, I have if I want to look at, let's say, a lesson I did with COMP397, I can look at my workspace. Here's my workspace. If I open this up, it'll open it up in a second. And I have full-fledged editor support here. So as I look up here, if you notice, this is my project. And as soon as this opens up, because it takes a second because they put it to sleep, this is all free, by the way, right? And you're not paying for any of this. And it has good connections. You can connect to GitHub. It has Git installed. If your machine, if you can't get Git working on your machine, if you can't use NPM or Node, use Cloud9. It takes 2 seconds to set up, and it's free. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. There it is. So here's an example of kind of a site where we're using. You can see that there's full support here. And if I want to add a TypeScript file, I can certainly do that, right? I can kind of go into right click, and I want to kind of add a file or whatever, a new file. And if I want to add a TypeScript file, I can certainly do something like myfile.ts. And when I do that, and if I double click on it, you can see that down here, it kind of identifies it as a TypeScript file. So you can totally do TypeScript online as well. You don't have to use something that's hard-coded. And down here, if you notice, there's a little bash window, right, which is Ubuntu, right? So I have Ubuntu Linux right here that I can do for command line, so you don't have to do heavy setup. Okay, so that's another one. I'm going to close this down for now because I'm not going to use that for now. If you don't want to use Azure and you want to use something like Heroku, I welcome that as well. Heroku is another service that I use frequently. I have a game that's up there right now that I made a few years ago here at the college, which was called, what did I call it? Oh yeah, Starbase 12, right? So Heroku, what it does is it's another kind of service that you can use, and it is, for the most part, free. You can also pay for it as well, but you can host stuff on Heroku, and it supports things like a Node project. It supports things with PHP and other things. One thing it doesn't do is straight HTML. So if you're going to try and launch a straight HTML with JavaScript kind of project, it wouldn't work. You have to make it into a Node project, right? Which is additional complication for people if you've never done Node, and most of you probably haven't. So I'm just putting it out there just as an alternate. If you want to challenge yourself and learn how to use Heroku, it's pretty cool. And if you want to check out Starbase 12, this is the game that I built, like I said, a few years ago. And I've updated it about a year ago. If you want to check it out, right? So it's pure JavaScript with TypeScript support, and it's got pretty good sound and everything else. Let's not do it now, but if you notice, it has a start screen with an instruction screen. It's kind of like my final project that I kind of made. And you can see that it's kind of a Star Trek game because I was a Star Trek kind of crazy person, right? So you can kind of back up and do kind of, right? You can't hear it because it's up here. But the idea is that you can make a full-fledged game, and it's all with JavaScript and TypeScript and everything else. And I did it all in Heroku, right? So there's a good example of if you want to take a look at what I've done. And that code is right up on GitHub. I've already shared it on GitHub. It's fully shared. You can always look at that code if you want to see an example. Whew. Okay, so tools. We're going to use Bower, right, for a front-end manager. So Bower is what we're using, right? Bower, what it does, it's a package manager for the web. It's like what it says. It's a very popular package manager. There are others, especially bundlers now that are becoming very, very popular. Webpack is a good one. But we're not going to use Webpack. We're going to use Bower. And what Bower does is it kind of fetches those tools we need, right, for Easel.js and maybe Bootstrap or anything else we need, and brings them into your application. Now, if you're a Visual Studio person, you can do the same thing with NuGet. NuGet Package Manager. You can go to NuGet, grab your Bootstrap, grab your Easel.js and Create.js and all that stuff, and bring it into your project that way. You don't have to do it through Bower if you're a Visual Studio person. But because we're going to use command line, Bower is the way to go. You can install Bower as a global package, a global node package, by, if you follow the examples, I'm going to go down this in a second. If you follow down here, there's a simple install, npm install -g for global Bower. And what it does, once you have Node installed, then you can install Bower as a global module. Now, speaking of Node, you can't do any of this without Node. Like I said, Node.js. There's another tool you're going to need as part of your arsenal if you're going to follow along with me. And right now, Node is at 6.22. It's moving so quickly, right? The current version. The long-term support version is 4.47. You can certainly use this one. but I highly recommend this one. Go with this one. Go with the latest version. If you're a Mac person, don't go to the Node site and download it. This would be a problem. I recommend using Homebrew. That's the way to go. So you don't have to do sudo everything. Otherwise, you'd have to do that everywhere. Sudo, whatever, however you say it. But I don't recommend that for a Mac. And if you want to go to Homebrew, you can always search for something like install Node on a Mac with Homebrew, right? Homebrew. And if you did that, something like that, some kind of, you can see that one of the first things that comes up here is how to install, Node.js on a Mac with Homebrew, and it gives you some directions on how to do that. Okay, I recommend this method because it eliminates the need for you to kind of download this thing, install it, and then always go, every time you do an npm package or run something or download something, you have to use a super user command, right? So if you've got everything installed, and I've got my little terminal here, just give me a second. I'm going to close this one down. So when I say terminal, if you're a Windows user, I want you to hear command prompt. Okay, it's the same. Or I want you to well, it's not the same, but I want you to hear command prompt. Okay, so when I say terminal, it's command prompt. All right, and it's gonna be a bunch of warnings because I'm already running things. So if I was to look at the terminal as an example, and if I was to look at my Node version, so I go Node -v for version, I got 6.21. Take a look at the latest version, we're at 6.22, and I installed that like last week. That's how fast it moves. So don't despair if your Node version isn't 6.22. If it's 6 point something, you're okay, right? Even if it's 4 point something, you're probably going to be okay with the stuff we're doing. Don't worry. Node at one point, like last year, was at 0.12, right? I'm not joking. And they merged with another Node IO, and it became version 4, right? Overnight from version 0.12, right? So don't despair if that happens. It's not because they're trying to trick you at all in any way. It's because Node is moving quickly and it's evolving. All right, so that's 6.21 is where I'm at. And if I go npm is the Node package manager. If I go -v, you're going to see mine's 3.95. Yours might be different if you download Node at this point now, right? So if I was going to install something like Bower, the Node package manager allowed me to do that. I would say npm, that's the command, Node package manager. I would use a verb like install, right? And then the package that I'm installing, Bower, right? And then -g for global, right? If I was only installing it for a project, I would just go --save, and --save would install into that project only, right? For the command line for that project. If I was going to install a package and I want it to be a dependency, but only a developer dependency, I would do --save -dev, right? Which would be a developer dependency. We're going to talk about Node in a second when we set up our project for the first time. But that's the syntax for installing Node and Node projects. Okay, let's take a look at typings. For a long time, we had in other videos, I had something called TSD. And TSD was a project that ran through GitHub. TSD now has been deprecated, right? Notice it says deprecated. And take a look at typings. And this is what we should be doing. It used to be installed with Node by doing this, npm install tsd -g. And some of my older videos show this, right? Unfortunately, this doesn't work anymore, right? And some of the type definition libraries for TypeScript don't connect properly with TSD. So I would recommend that you don't go to TSD and use typings. This is the new way of doing things, right? Typings is very similar to TSD, and you still install typings the same way. npm install typings -g for global, right? And then what you can do is you can search, right, for a type definition library for for a module of your choice, something that you want to use, right? That you want to import, because we can't just make our own code, right? Like the person class I made earlier on my playground. It's not just doing this, right? That would be easy if all we did was this. We want to use existing code like jQuery. I want to get code hinting for jQuery, right? With TypeScript. I want to get code hinting for Create.js, EZO.js. I want to get code hinting for that. And the only way I can do that is if I use a type definition library for that particular JavaScript module, right? So each JavaScript module, lots of them out there right now, including AngularJS, React, all the most popular front-end and back-end frameworks and so on, even Node, as an example, have type definition libraries that describe what the library is doing. So I can get type hinting, code hinting on these libraries. And by the way, that was never available before TypeScript. If you were to take your jQuery and try and get code hinting, as an example, in Visual Studio, you'll get limited code hinting, but not so with TypeScript. If you add TypeScript, now you get full code hinting, right? You'll code hinting, code coloring. It'll give you examples of what to do, and so on. And that's what we want to use type definition libraries for. We'll talk about this in a second. If you don't know, did he talk about this at all? Typings? Yeah. So we need to do this. We can't use you know, kind of libraries that exist. And in order for us to use typings, there's going to be a couple of steps. One is install typings, then search for a particular type definition library, whatever it's called. And then when we want to install it, we want to use typings install whatever it is. And there's a bit of a, you know, a prefix, if you will, that we have to use. DT stands for definitely typed. There's a bit of a tilde, and then the name of the library that you're adding in, right? Then it's -G -S, -G for global -S. Typings is also evolving. I would honestly recommend to you that in the future, within the next 3 months, it's going to look different. I'll tell you right now, because 3 months ago, it wasn't like this. It uses something called ambient, right? It was totally different, right? So as we move forward, you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of changes. And if you notice, here's some of the sources we can use with typings. Again, DT was probably my favorite source, definitely typed, which is the GitHub community, you know, kind of supported, you know, repository for all type definition libraries across every JavaScript library you can think of, right? It's there. If you want to do 3JS, 3D kind of JavaScript, it's there. If you want to use, of course, the most popular one is jQuery, jQuery UI, Bootstrap, all those kind of modules, they're all there, and they'll give you type hinting for writing stuff or extending those modules with your own classes and objects. So that's why we use typings. All right, so this is the other one I wanted you to get, right? Whew, it's a load, right? It's crazy, right? Okay, let's set up a new project here because we want to get going. So hopefully you're using Visual Studio Code in front of you. I'm just going to you know, drop this down. I'm going to drop this. This is the assignment I'm going to talk about later on, right? It's up online already, and we'll go back to some of these questions at the break. Thank you for your questions. I'll come back to you in a second, right? And let's just kill my crazy schedule. And let's go into how I start this off. So I want to start off a new module. I'm going to make a new folder on my desktop, right? Which, if you're a Mac person or a PC person, doesn't matter. Make a new folder on your desktop. Let's call it COMP397, where we're actually going to do some real work, right? And in my COMP397 folder, what I want to do is create a new folder that I'm going to call Lesson 8, right? So let's name it properly. COMP397-Summer 2016, right? -Lesson 8, right? Which is what we're doing today, right? We're going to create, out of this Lesson 8 folder, we're going to create our, what I like to call a boilerplate for what we're going to be doing from now on, right? I'm not going to just keep doing this over and over again. We're going to do one time, and then after this, next week, we're going to be ready to roll with new projects and stuff that we're going to build, okay? So I've got my empty module here, and I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to assume you don't know anything about Visual Studio Code. I'm going to drag and drop this folder, empty, into my Visual Studio Code. And notice what we have here is an empty module. Here's an empty project over here. I need to start building this project up so it does something, right? So what I want to do here, and we'll take a break in about 10 minutes when I start doing this, so we can kind of have a chat too, and you guys can send me some more stuff on Slack, things that you have a problem with, you don't want to talk about in class, right? Which is totally cool. Let's add some structure to this. So I want to add, notice on the top here, we have a thing that says file, another thing that says new folder. I want to add a new folder, and we're going to color it the same way you would expect to see it in Visual Studio. So if you wanted to take your code and drag and drop it into Visual Studio tomorrow, or download my code from GitHub, I'm going to try and structure it very similarly so you can drag it into your Visual Studio and you can use it no problem. So let's do that. So content is definitely a folder I want you all to use to contain things like CSS, right? So content. And I also want you to create another one. Oh, I made a mistake, but let's see what happens when I make this mistake. I want you to make another one called assets. Oh man, assets is inside content. I didn't mean that. Well, just drag it out, right? Drag it out, right? And let's make another one. I want to do another one called scripts, right? Because we're going to need scripts folder. So assets, content, and scripts. Inside my assets folder, what I want to do is make another folder called images. We're going to put our images in there. And another folder called audio, just organizing. And if there's any custom fonts we want to use, I want to pick another folder called fonts. So we're going to put all of our stuff inside assets. These are our assets we're going to have. We're creating our structure for our project right now. In my content folder, I want to put a new file We're going to call this app.css, or let's call it game because I'm making games. Game.css, right? There it is. It's empty right now. I'm going to slow down for a second so you can catch up. I'm going to go quick. That's why we record things, right? And under my scripts, this is where all my scripts are going to live, right? Here's what I want to do from the get-go. I don't want my game.ts script, my TypeScript, to live outside in the scripts folder. I want it to be in something called core. I want to have my core libraries encapsulated into a core module, right? So let's right-click on scripts and make a new folder. We'll call this core, right? Inside my core module is where I'm going to put my first game.ts folder. So game.ts file. So right-click, a new file. We're going to call this game.ts. That's where our TypeScript is going to live. You can see how I'm building this up. By the way, if you're curious, it's mirrored directly inside your operating system. So anything I built here in Visual Studio Code is mirrored inside the operating system identically, right? There's no difference to the kind of structure that I'm building out here between this and the operating system. This is the advantage of using Visual Studio Code. To me, you have more control that you would have in Visual Studio. I know I've had some discussions even today with other professors that disagree. They think Visual Studio is the be-all and end-all. Yes, it's really powerful and it's really awesome, but this gives you the ability to work cross-platform. Maybe tomorrow you're not going to work in a coding house that uses Visual Studio. What are you going to do? You're going to say, I'm sorry, I can't code because I only learned Visual Studio. I only know how to drag and drop stuff when I make the my web stuff work. Come on, can't do drag and drop on the web. That's not how we develop things in the real world. We hand code it. We do everything by with a command line. Now, unless there's a corollary for that. And I got to say, if you're doing ASP.NET right now, even though ASP.NET Core has come out and it's available with Visual Studio and on cross-platform, I still think it's still so young that you should still probably do it with Visual Studio. Visual Studio, if you're doing ASP.NET Web Forms, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, use Visual Studio. That's what it's really for. If you're using C#, Visual Studio, C++, Visual Studio, it's fantastic. Java, no. I would probably use something like IntelliJ IDEA for that, right? That's just me. But I wouldn't use. But everything else, if you're using if you're doing a mean stack project, it's going to be with Visual Studio Code, with Atom, with brackets, with Sublime, with something else, because you don't need a heavy-duty IDE like Visual Studio. Can it help you? Yes, but it can also hinder you because you may not have full control of what you're doing. All right, so that's why we're doing it this way. All right, so here's my game.ts file. Now we're setting up easel.js. I know this, right? And in order for us to use Bower, I'm assuming now that you've got Bower installed and everything else, right? If you've got Bower installed, that's great. If you don't have Bower installed, get it installed, please, because we need to do that. Okay. On the root of my project now, I'm in the root of my project, I need something that ties everything together, and that is my index.html page. Without my index.html page, everything is just pieces. All right, that's all it is. Because we're doing a web game, and we're not doing a node web game, we're using the web, we need some kind of HTML document to tie things together for now, right? And that's called index.html for us. Again, it has to be called index for most web hosts, okay? Index default, default.htm, index.htm, default.aspx if you're using ASP.NET. It won't work here, by the way, and other things. But it can't just be called mygame.html, okay? It won't work. If you put it up on Azure, it'll say, or even on Heroku, it'll go, what are you doing? You have no access to the rest of my site. Most servers look specifically for a file that's called index.html. So please call your file, for simplicity's sake, for our next 7 weeks, index.html. Please do that. Let's do that. So I'm going to say new file. We'll call it index.html. I know this is pretty crazy, and you might think everyone knows this, but no, people don't know this. They create files that are called game or something else because they want to be cool. But actually, it breaks your code. It breaks your project. Doesn't work. Okay. So index.html. What we want to do here at the top is, in Visual Studio Code, we want to create a doc type. I'm going to hand bomb this called HTML, right? And here's the emmet. And who doesn't know how to use emmet? Anyone not know how to use emmet? Hopefully, yeah, some people won't know. That's good. Some people actually put their hand up. I bet you most of you don't know how to use emmet. Let's see how it works. Emmet is a shorthand for doing HTML, right? So how do we do this? Well, we start typing HTML. And if you're using Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, you can do this, right? You put greater than, which means contains, right? What does the HTML document contain? Right? Well, it contains both a head and a body tag, right? It takes those two tags. If I press tab, I got this. right? This is crazy stuff right here, right? Do I want this? By the way, it might not do that for you. Here's the other thing I could do. And not just HTML, but I could also do something like this. My HTML is going to have a lang. My language for the HTML is going to have a lang of English, right? A language of English. I'm going to contain my head tag in there. My head tag, in my head tag, I'm going to have some meta tags, right, that are going to be contained there. So if there's a meta tag inside my head tag, right, for sure. And you know what? Aside, next to my meta tag, there's going to be a title. Maybe I'll make a couple of meta tags. Meta tag times 2 plus a title, right? Oh yeah, it's crazy, right? And then next to my head, there's going to be a body, right? And maybe inside my body, you know, I want to have something like a canvas element with a ID of canvas, right? Yeah, I know, it's pretty crazy. And if I do this, right, it's like it's 2 seconds, right? So one line, bang, you got your HTML. Let me do that again. Let me undo, right? Right? If you're using Visual Studio Code, you're there with me, right? If you're using Visual Studio, you're there with me because Visual Studio doesn't use Emmet. It uses something called Zen coding. If you're using Visual Studio 2015, I'm using Visual Studio 2015 Update 3 Enterprise Edition. You can download that free as students of Centennial College, right? And something of, if you want to do what I'm doing in Visual Studio, you can certainly download something called VS Web Essentials, which I fully recommend if you're using Visual Studio. Download VS Web Essentials for Visual Studio if you're a Visual Studio person, because it gives you a pile of stuff that you can do, right? Including really cool TypeScript support, right? You can actually download Visual Studio Web Essentials right through Visual Studio by using NuGet Package Manager to find VS Web Essentials for Visual Studio. And then it'll give you something called Zen coding, which is exactly what I'm doing right here. If you look at Zen coding, this is the stuff that I'm doing right now. I'm actually creating, well, actually, originally it was called Emmet. That was the original project, right? And what Emmet does is it gives us a shorthand for writing HTML, right? So we don't have to really fool around with HTML. This is not an HTML course. It's not a CSS course, right? But we want to run quick and dirty HTML like this as an example that gives us everything we need. All right? It's called Emmet. So if I go back here, you can see that this I want 2 meta tags, and if I press tab, I got my 2 meta tags, and I can fill them in. I need to fill this in with character set is equal to UTF-8, right? And I also want to make it mobile compatible, so I'm going to put something like name is equal to viewport, right? And then content is equal to width is equal to device.width dash width, and then initial scale. My viewport is equal to 1. This is pretty important because it kind of sets up your viewport for your application, right? By the way, if you're a Visual Studio person, you probably have this out of the box, right? And you might say, but Tom, if I have this out of the box, what do you want me to work so hard? How come? This isn't a learning Visual Studio Code course. This isn't a learning GitHub course. This isn't a learning Bower course. Hold on, are we doing all these learnings? Yeah. Right? That's why I'm pushing you to go down this road as opposed to stick with Visual Studio. Visual Studio, you can write this stuff. You've done Visual Studio for 7 weeks. Well, I'm being nice, right? You've done Visual Studio a lot, right? And now we're kind of taking you down a different road. Okay, so we've got our body tag, we've got our canvas. Here's our HTML canvases with this thing. We're going to work a lot with canvas, and we need 2 things. For now, I want my application to, as a default, be the width of my application is going to be 640, and the height of my application, my game, is going to be 480 for now. It's a very small width. You can choose other values if you want. It's not going to affect me in any way, right? And remember, when we make our application, we need to add CSS and so on to kind of style our application. We'll call this our, our COMP397. Call this our boilerplate, right? We're going to use for this course, right? And again, it'll be lesson 8, which will be our boilerplate, right? But I want to add some sections. I'm going to do some oops, let's undo that. I'm going to do some comments, right? So let's put some comments. This is our CSS section. This is where the CSS is going to go in our file, right? We don't have any yet. And I also want to add a JavaScript section, right? So this is our JavaScript section, just so we can compartmentalize or annotate where everything is going to go within our application. And I think this is important for us to do, right? So again, kind of a little HTML document that we want to put out there. Hey, but we have like no libraries, right? And I could certainly go into each website and download the library manually. Oh my God, imagine that. I got to get jQuery, I need to get Bootstrap, I need to get Font Awesome, I need to get, let's see, Easel.js, Sound.js, Preload.js, and then attach that all to my file somehow. That's a hell of a lot of places to go and downloads and everything else. And this is why we use Bower. In order for us to use Bower, though, the default place where all the Bower stuff goes is Bower_components. That's the directory, which I don't like, right? So what I like to do is create a new file inside my project, right? As an example, right-click here, make a new file, and I'm going to call this Bower Bower, B-O-W-E-R, RC, Bower RC. And what Bower RC is, it's just a configuration file for Bower. So when I use Bower, it's going to say, okay, every time I download a project or whatever from Bower, any kind of framework, whatever, I'm going to put it in a specific location. Where do I want to put all my files, right? I want to use some JSON notation here, right, for Bower. And if you press Control Space, it's going to actually give you some options. One of them is directory, right? I don't want to put it in Bower components. I want to use my current directory structure, which is scripts, lib. This is where I want put my Bower components inside of. Scripts lib. Right? So again, this lives in my Bower RC file. Okay. Okay, cool. Are you with me? I know it's fast. I know we're moving quick. I know we're doing a lot. I'm trying to make up for like 7 weeks of Visual Studio. But so far we have just this structure right here. We don't have anything in scripts other than my game.ts script, which is right now it's empty. There's nothing in there. And there's something in my game.css, which is pretty much empty. But I want to download everything that I need into my scripts. And in order for me to do that, to enable all this stuff, I need to initialize my my Bower. And in order for me to do that, in here in Visual Studio Code, I can right-click down here, and I can open in terminal. If you're using a PC, it'll be open in command prompt. When you hear terminal, hear command prompt. Okay. Right. You could do internal as well. Actually, it's built in. If you really want to, Visual Studio Code also has an internal code, a command prompt or terminal. It allows you to do that. If you actually look at that, if you go to View, right? If I click on this, right, and if I go to View, I can toggle my integrated terminal or command prompt inside my editor. It actually does it right here, right? And it's just hidden. It's in there. If I kind of press down there, you can see that it's there, right? So I got an integrated editor. If you download the latest version of Visual Studio Code, you have an integrated command prompt. But for me, I like to work a little bit separate because I can always put this window away, and I want to maximize the space we have in the background. So I'm not going to use the integrated editor. I'm just going to kind of use this. Notice that it opened up exactly. This is why I did this. It opened up in my project. So this is my project, COMP397, summer 2016, lesson 8, right? So I didn't have to, kind of find my project or anything like that with command prompt. It did it automatically for me. Now, if you can't do this, right? Sometimes you can't do this or whatever. You can always just drag and drop. So let's say I open up my project. It's not in the right place, and I want to. I'm just going to go to the background for a second, and I've got here's my my operating system stuff, and I want to go into my COMP397 summer 2016, and I want to kind of connect to this. I could go CD desktop, right? I could do that, and then I can go into COMP397, right? There it is, COMP397, right? And then I could go into COMP397 26. I could do that, right? That's really long, and if you're not really good with command prompt, that's maybe too long. What about doing CD and then drag and drop? That works Mac and Windows, right? You can do that, and then you can get into your place as well. You need to get into that folder, though, because we're going to be doing stuff. It works on Windows too, by the way, for command prompt. Just drag and drop CD, space, and then drag and drop your folder into Windows, and then it'll work like that as well if you can't make your integrated window work somehow. Here's where we get a little hairy. The stuff I'm going to do depends on whether you follow my instructions in the notification I put out there. If you don't have npm or git working on your command prompts right now, you can't install Bower, and you can't do what I'm going to do now, right? It just won't work. It'll say unrecognized command, right? You need to fix that. Please follow my instructions that I put up there to fix that. You need to go into your environment variables on your PC and fix that problem. right? But if you have everything working, I'm going to open up in terminal. Here I am, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Bower. Now remember, I've already done an npm Bower. This is what I've already done. I'm assuming you've done npm Bower, or sorry, npm install Bower -g. You've already done this, I'm assuming, right? And if you've already done this and installed everything, then you should be able to do something like this: Bower init. You go Bower init. What it's going to do is going to run a little wizard, right? A batch file that runs in the background for your Windows or Mac or Linux if you're a Linux person, right? And you know, put in a lowercase version of your project. Please do not use the uppercase version that comes with this. It's incompatible nowadays with most versions. It'll cough out. You know, some web providers will not like it. So please just use lowercase versions. So COMP397, summer, lowercase 2016, dash, less than 8. Sometimes the dashes are also incompatible. All right. Press enter, and notice there's a description. You can say boilerplate. You know, for COMP397, you put a little description in there. I don't have a main file. I don't care about keywords. Here's my author. That's me, right? My license, MIT. You can choose another license later on if you want. Homepage, I don't have anything. And you know what? Yeah, yes, yes, yes. How about that? Accept all the defaults, right? What this does is it creates a little bower.json file really quickly for you. Here it is. It's the same file we just made. And what it does is it keeps track of all of our front-end dependencies. All of our front-end dependencies. I swear we'll take a break in 5 minutes, I swear. Right? I know people are going crazy. But so if you've got this little file, and all I've done to set that off, if you notice, if I go scroll back up, is I did a Bower init, right? That's all I did, right? And then I just typed in some of the stuff it asked me to, and then I just accepted the rest. I didn't change anything. You can actually accept all the defaults. Just press enter, 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 enter all the way, and it'll kind of put all those pieces in place. All right, cool. So we've got that stuff, and now we've got this new file that's inside of our project called bower.json. And what this does is it keeps track of all of our dependencies. Okay, without this, we can't save our dependencies. I want to create some dependencies, and one of them is going to be, of course, jQuery. Let's launch jQuery for the first time. We don't need to. I don't need jQuery for much. And instead of maybe some UI stuff I want to do later on, we probably won't use it, but I want to show you how it's done. You do this. Here, I'll just do a clear. Clear on Mac, CLS on Windows. And if you do something like this, Bower, install, and then the name of the file or the name of the project you want to download, jQuery, and then -- save. Because jQuery will be a dependency for our project, let's say. I press enter. What it's going to do is going to go out the web, grab jQuery, right? Now notice that it says jQuery 3. Is that what I want? jQuery 3 is not compatible with Bootstrap, okay? It's just not. Just FYI, right? But I can actually specify, you know, which version of jQuery I want. So if I want jQuery 3, I mean that's the default right now. I can certainly get that. Hey, let's see what it did. Well, it kind of went up here and said, I got my dependencies, and I need jQuery 3 as part of my project. I can't make my project go without jQuery. It's not really true, actually, right? I don't need jQuery because I'm not doing jQuery in my project. I'm using Easel and Node. And by the way, we'll talk about that. We're going to be using, of course, the Easel.js library. So if I go to create.js, assuming that you've already gone here, but just in case you haven't, Easel.js or create.js is part of it's a suite of libraries we're going to be using for the remainder of this course, right? And why did I choose Easel, Tween, Sound, and Preload as opposed to something like Phaser, right? Phaser is very opinionated. It's all one system. This is broken out. You can use this not just for games, but also to make banner ads, other kinds of things that can help you later on, as well as stuff that lives in the canvas outside of making a game. Okay, it's not just for games. It's for everything else. That's why I wanted to use it, so you can kind of use it as something that's transferable, a transferable skill you can use in your web design, not just for games, right? So Easel, look, I have to download each of these things individually, or I can also use the CDN if I wanted to. We're not going to use the CDN here. We're gonna kind of do things manually. But let's go back. So I don't really need jQuery. And how do I uninstall stuff? It's the same way. I can go Bower, uninstall jQuery -- save, and what it's going to do is remove jQuery, right? So if I go back to my project, right, jQuery gone. I don't want jQuery anymore, right? So installing and uninstalling is simple as that. It's the name of the project we're using, Bower, a verb, install, similar to what we did with npm. A a verb, and then are you saving it as part of your structure, or is it just temporary? Are you just testing with it right now, right? And what about if I want to, I don't know how to use Bower, how do I do it? I can go Bower, if I go minus help, right? A lot of times Bower will have a lot of stuff you can do here. For example, if I want to find the code that I want to download, my front-end library that I want that I don't have, example, easel.js, and I don't know what it's called, I can always search for easel.js by Bower, search, and then the name of the library. Let's try that out. So let's clear that out. Bower, search. I want to search for the library I want, and I want to call it easel.js. Right? So I kind of search that out, and it says, look, here's easel.js. This is what I can always install this. It installs, all this is the same. One of these is fine. With easel with a capital E and capital JS, or easel with lower EJS is fine. Either one of them is fine, right? So that's how I would install. Let's try that out. So this is my first library. So Bower, install, easel.js, right? Minus save. That's definitely a dependency for us. And it downloads the latest version, 0.8.2, right? And notice that Bower is kicking up a stink. It's saying invalid meta. The name is recommended to be lowercase, can contain digits, dots, and dashes, right? Can contain it, but it's got to be lowercase, my name of my folder, right? And notice that I have like, dash. What it's looking for is to take some of this away. It's okay. Leave it alone. But notice that I have easel.js here as a dependency. Let's do the rest of them. And we can also do, with Bower, we can also install stuff all in one line, right? Right, so let's just do that. So I'll say Bower, install, all in one line. I want to have, let's see, tween.js, sound.js, and preload.js. Okay, let's see if I can get the pattern, right? So tween.js, right? Sound.js, preload.js. Oops, if I spell it properly. Minus save, enter. And then it'll go fetch all that stuff. Oh, didn't find something. Sound.js, didn't find that. But the rest it found, right? And kind of put it in play. Let's see if I can find sound.js. So I'll say Bower, search for sound.js, right? And if it finds it, oh, there it is, capital S, right? So I'm showing you, if you can't find a library, how you find it, okay? So I'm going to say Bower, install, sound.js, capital S, capital JS, right? Minus save, and now we have all the libraries we need, right? Installed in the right place inside my files, inside my project, which is right in here. If I go to my scripts, under lib, I have easel and sound. Sometimes it doesn't update, but if you look at your operating system folders, you can see that I've got it all. I've got all my folders, easel and sound. Hey, where's tween and tween and everything else? Oh man, what happened? Right? I didn't get tween.js because it messed up because of sound where it was, and I didn't get preload. Man, that's bad. Let's find that out. That's a problem, right? So let's Bower, search for tween.js. Probably it's capital T, capital JS, my guess. Okay. Yeah, should have done that already. So Bower install tween.js minus save. See that? There we go. Bower install, my guess is preload with a capital P, capital JS, preload JS minus save. It's going to grab those files, and if I missed it, it'll go grab them and put them back in. And now, if you look, I got all the libraries. How do I access them? Because you still got to connect those into your project, right? Let's take a short break, 10 minutes, and when we come back, I'll show you how to connect this all to the project, and I'll put it up on GitHub, I'll share it up on GitHub, and I'll deploy it to Azure Live, okay? Take a quick break, 10 minutes.